Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Sayyidina al-Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Dear brothers and sisters, it's been a little while since Eid now, and I hope you've enjoyed the festivities, including, connecting with loved ones and some great food. And I think that we've had about 3 weeks now, and it may be time to get back to some good discipline, inshallah, before we lose all the benefit of the month. So we spoke extensively during the month about retraining our metabolic health, and we looked at strategies of how we could combine this with fasting. And what I'd like to do today, inshallah, hopefully in a very efficient way, is give you some bullet points as to how we can start to really take control of our health properly now that we're not doing Ramadan or Shawwal fasts. And to get things back on track actually pretty quickly, inshallah, and set the pace for our lives ahead. So without further ado, I'm going to share my slides with you. Okay, so today we're going to talk about how to reset our gut after Eid. And many of us may have heard about gut health, and certainly I did mention this in one of the early videos. Why is gut health so important? The reason being that the gut is an internal part of our body that's actually also an external part. So it carries a number of very unique functions. Firstly, many of you may have heard of the gut microbiome, which is basically home to about 3.5 to 4 billion bacteria of different strains. These bacteria are absolutely instrumental in regulating almost every single body function that we have, alongside some of these other processes that you can see here on this slide. So they're not only important in helping maintain our immune system and production of vitamins and digestion, metabolism, so many things, but at the same time we know that when people have chronic illnesses, often the gut microbiome has been disrupted in some way or other. And I'm not going to go into that in too much detail, but what we need to know is how to maintain a healthy gut microbiome. The other thing is being an external barrier to the world. So the food that we eat is actually something of the world outside of us, and it has to cross into our bodies. And the key barrier to this is the gut, and therefore the gut is the largest immune organ in the body. It has something called gut tissue, gut associated lymphoid tissue, which is very instrumental in our body developing healthy immunity towards infections, whether that's coughs and colds or coronavirus or any other infection, which is why it's so important to look after our gut health. As I said, it's a barrier to the outside world, so it protects us from toxins and poisons and other horrible things, infections and illness. And certainly if this barrier is compromised, we start to allow foreign substances into our bloodstream, and we can develop allergies and various other illnesses. The other interesting thing is that the gut is like a second brain, and this is for more than one reason. We know that often if the gut health is compromised, then the brain health is also compromised, and likewise if the brain health is compromised, the gut health is compromised. And there are various mechanisms for this. One is that there is a long wandering nerve called the vagus nerve, which runs between the brain, the heart and the gut. It's like a communication system. You can think of it as a silk route, one long winding path. And the other thing is that the chemicals that are produced in the gut, such as serotonin, which many of you may have heard of, are actually producing more of that in the gut than you are in the brain. So these, it's actually what we call a neurotransmitter factory. So it's a chemical factory. So the two are very closely intertwined. As we all know, it's instrumental in digesting our food and producing and releasing energy from food as well as nutrients. The gut helps to regulate our metabolism with the help of these, with the help of the microbiome, with the help of these gut bacteria. And then these gut bacteria that are also important in cellular function, how our cells respond to situation In fact, the bacteria that we find in our gut are actually determinant of the environment in which our cells find themselves, so their environment, and that is influenced by our lifestyles, and it can in fact affect gene expression and therefore have epigenetic effects, which means that the way the genes are expressed could be passed from generation to generation. And because of these instrumental this huge capacity to influence our overall health. In fact, the health of the microbiome is also associated with protection against cancer. So what happens when our gut health fails us or it goes wrong in there? It's not the be all and the end all, because gut health can be recovered, and what I'm going to talk to you today is a little bit about that. Not only because we're trying to create an immune resilience and a metabolic resilience to coronavirus, which as we're discovering is very much the illness is very much responsive. That what we suffer is very much related to a large inflammatory response, which is why we're finding things like dexamethasone, steroids, helpful in dampening down the inflammatory response and saving lives. But the gut health is very, very important in developing our resilience. So what happens when the gut is not healthy? Lots of things. Your gut microbiome can literally talk to your brain. It can literally tell you what to eat. To some extent, I'm not taking away responsibility for the choices we make, but just to make you aware that these are very powerful little things, and it can be associated with weight gain, metabolic dysfunction, so type 1 diabetes, insulin resistance, raised inflammatory markers, which you find in a number of chronic illnesses, including arthritis, autoimmune diseases, and such like. Be associated with a host of respiratory and allergic illnesses such as asthma and allergic rhinitis and many allergies, nutrition deficiencies, so anything that's absorbed in the gut, which is the bulk of our nutrients, and could be deficient, so you could have B12 deficiency and various other deficiencies. As I mentioned, the gut is a second brain, so if the gut health is not good, often you will find that there are also associated mental health issues. I'm not saying one is causative of the other, but it's almost like a feedback loop. And we find that children with autism have a much narrower spectrum of gut microbiota. And people also suffer with things like brain fog and chronic fatigue syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease. Almost any chronic illness will have some disruption of the gut health and gut microbiome. So it's said that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Now, whether we're talking about his physical heart, which we know that if we eat incorrectly, we can get heart disease and inflammation of the blood vessels, a process known as atherosclerosis, and we can become sick. And likewise, his spiritual heart, so we can endear a man through what we feed him. But actually, what is the way to a man's brain? I think I've just given you the answer. So the way to the man's brain is also through his stomach. And simply this is because the stomach is the second brain, and the brain and the stomach is so closely interlinked. And from our point of view, the spiritual heart is closely interlinked to our gut as well. And there are so many ahadith and so many verses about avoiding excess, eating halal and tayyib, and of course we have the whole science of Tib al-Nabawi. And I'm just going to share a couple of reminders here. The Prophet ﷺ commands them what is just and forbids them what is evil. He allows them as lawful what is good and pure, so halal and tayyib, and prohibits them what is bad and impure. So in terms of what is pure, what is tayyib, that is linguistically something that is of benefit, it is wholesome, it is good for us. So the command here is not to just eat anything and everything that comes your way and to eat mindlessly, but actually to eat very, very mindfully, to eat knowing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed and not allowed, and to avoid those things that are harmful or impure or not good, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited. And there is a saying from Umar radiallahu anhu, and this I think is quite poignant. It's not a hadith, but I thought it was beneficial. Avoid getting a pot belly, for it spoils the body, causes diseases, and makes doing the prayer tiring. and avoid all excess, for God hates a learned man who is fat. And of course, this is not against fat people, but I think this is just amazing, because we know that belly fat is just so toxic. It is not just the accumulation of fat under the skin, but it really is associated with organ fat, with diabetes, with heart trouble, with insulin resistance, with even bending down to pray is difficult, and those fat cells are actually inflammatory cells. They're causing the release of toxic chemicals in the body. So it's one marker of inflammation, but the process is actually systemic, so it's throughout the body. And when we are in an inflamed state, actually our mood and our energy levels are not good. And remember to avoid all excess, because that's the fact that contributes to obesity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like excess. So Whistle Stop tore through something called leaky gut, and you can read a lot more about this. It's not something that mainstream medicine recognises as yet. However, at a scientific level, we find that people that have compromised gut, which we talked about before, actually there is a process where the cells of the gut, which you can see in the slide, become compromised, and partially digested food and chemicals and toxins can leak through, and your body will mount either an inflammatory or an immune reaction to these things, and that can make you very sick over time. So it's a simplified image, and I have taken it from Facebook, so it's not my image. But it will show you that things such as antibiotics lower the diversity of the gut bacteria. If you have autoimmunity, so your body's fighting itself, you've got food sensitivities, you've got a dysfunction or a disruption of the gut bacteria. In many of these conditions, getting frequent illnesses, you've probably got a leaky gut. And there are other things that are associated with this, such as anti-inflammatory drugs, low stomach acid, poor diet, stress toxins, environmental toxins, the way you were born. All these things can affect the integrity of the gut. So how do we reset the gut? This is a fast track reset. Obviously, within the scope of this short video, I can't go into this in a huge amount of detail, but essentially in some studies people have been able to reset their metabolic health, which underpins a lot of our illness, our inflammatory response, and perhaps explains why people with poor metabolic health, such as diabetes and high blood pressure, have such a poor response to coronavirus. But it can be done in some anecdotal studies in 10 days, or if not in 21 days if you follow a rigid routine, and that might not be for everybody in a generic platform, but I've given you some of the elementary principles here. So step one, depending on where you are, just remove all your junk and processed genetically modified and sugary foods, remove any artificial sweetness and deep fried foods, or anything with more than 5 ingredients that you bought from a shop. And that would probably be the first step for a lot of people. However, if you have managed to make some changes over Ramadan, or you are somebody who is more health conscious and prepares their meal at home, well, the next step for you would be all of step one, plus eliminating foods containing gluten. So that's things like bread and pasta and even some types of oats and rye. So you would remove all the foods that contain gluten. Oats may or may not contain gluten, but you would probably just want to steer clear, and remove all your dairy, because both of these seem to cause leaky gut and cause a lot of inflammation. And it seems that unfortunately a lot of people are reacting to gluten because the strain of wheat that we have is a hybridized strain, which is meant to produce large yields quite quickly, but has a very large gluten molecule, which most people are reacting to. Even in healthy volunteers where they've exposed them to that, they've found some sort of immune response in the gut. If you are going to eat grains, go for whole grain. We talked a lot about a low carb approach over Ramadan. I'm not going to talk about that here today. What we're talking about is really taking out the gluten and dairy, and possibly taking out grains altogether. Remember that it's not all about nutrition, it's a fine balance, it's an orchestra. So everything has to be in harmony and in synchrony. So think about movement snacking. So getting off your chair every 90 minutes for an exercise break, and including regular exercise in the form of running or HIIT or any form of movement that really works for you. Going for a good 8 hours of quality sleep, including meditation, particularly mindfulness meditation, yoga and prayer. And alhamdulillah, we're very blessed to have our salah. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us that Allah bi dhikrillahi tatma'inna al-qulub, verily in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. So rest your heart and rest your soul. And connection. The lockdown is relaxing, but we, of course, as a higher risk population, need to remain very, very careful. But we can still spread the love. We can spread the love inside our homes. We can hug, kiss, cuddle. We can pick up the phone and we can meet at a social distance. And I want to share a very beautiful hadith with you, which I think is a recipe for success. And it's as relevant today as it was 1400 years ago. So Abdullah bin Salam radiallahu anh said, the first thing, when the Prophet came to Medina, he said, "O people, afsahul salam," so spread the salam, spread the greeting, okay, وَطْعِمُوا الطَّعَامَ, and feed others, and uphold the ties of kinship, and pray at night when other people are sleeping, and you will enter paradise with salam. Now this is a well-being hadith. It's amazing. It's saying connect, spread love, get to know people, spread peace, feed others, share the food, okay, and hopefully that will be halal and tayyib food. Connect your blood ties, and then rest your soul through worship. Feed your soul, in fact. Rest your soul from the day and feed your soul at night when people are sleeping, and you will enter Jannah. And you will find that tranquility in this life as well, inshallah. And this is narrated in Sunan Ibn Majah. So Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine, and let medicine be thy food. So you're going to be taking out all these food groups. And you could extend it if you wanted. You could take out eggs and peanuts and soy and corn and chocolate, but I would suggest that you don't do that unsupervised, that you have the support of a proper nutritionist or a lifestyle medicine practitioner or doctor to be able to help you do that safely. So I've simplified it for you. But what are you going to be eating when you've taken out all these things? It does feel like the world is not such a wonderful place, and that pleasure of eating has been taken away, basic pleasure. But it hasn't, and remember, this is a short-term process. So you're going to make sure you're eating the rainbow, so you're eating a wide variety of fruit and vegetables and foods of different colours, and you want to try and go for organic foods where you can. And if you've got some time to do some gardening at the moment, then homegrown is even better. Try and go for high fibre foods. It is a bit difficult if you're taking out the grain, so you need to make sure you have the entirety of the vegetable. And unripe bananas are a very, very good source of what we call prebiotics, so undigestible starches which feed the bacteria in the gut. You could also put in some bone broth or mushroom broth. And these are very, very easy to make. Bone broth is amazing because it tends to heal the gut. It contains collagen, and for some reason it just seems to heal the gut. So it's a very good food to have. And you would basically just get perhaps a chicken carcass, or any bones will do. And you would basically cook them for a period of 24 to 48 hours with water, salt, maybe whatever seasoning you want. And you would add in some apple cider vinegar to help leach the minerals from the bones. Mushroom broth is similar. You could probably cook it in, a few hours, but again, with water and salt and celery and perhaps some carrots, and let it cook and cook and cook so that you leach all the vitamins from the mushrooms. It's a highly nutritious soup that you can have, and you can put it into either your meals, or you can have it on its own as a hot drink. Remember to keep well hydrated. And if you want, you can add in some green tea because that's rich in antioxidants, but you don't want to overdo that because of the high caffeine content. And remember, you can still have your healthy fats such as avocados and salmon, and you could include some organ meats because organ meats are very, very nutrient dense. But if you are going to have meat, do try and go for organic meat where the animals have not been pumped full of antibiotics, which have disrupted the animal's own metabolism and microbiome. So you're going to do this for about 3 weeks. Around the sort of 3 to 4 week mark, you would then reintroduce one food at a time that you have taken out. So say you have taken out dairy, or you would have a normal sized portion in increasing amounts over the next 3 days. And you would watch to see if there is any kind of reaction. And there are many ways. You can look at your energy levels, you can look at your skin, you can look at your digestion, you can look at, but you will become aware if there is a difference. So you would reintroduce one food at a time. So this process in itself can take a couple of weeks, and you're getting to know yourself. And of course, if you don't perceive a reaction, then that's all good. But you will have given your gut a break in this time and healed it up, inshallah. But if you are still reacting to a food, then the suggestion would be to keep that food out of your diet till your gut has had some chance to mend itself. So there we go. These are the weapons of mass destruction. Overeating, grazing, eating mindlessly, having large amounts of sugary food. Now that includes too much sweet fruits, so tropical fruits in particular, and dried fruits. You can have some fruit in moderation, but really sugar, fruits are nature's bags of candy, so we should have them in moderation. Avoiding deep fried foods and unhealthy fats, so things like vegetable oils, should be avoided. Uber processed foods, so high processed foods like breakfast cereals and anything that doesn't, sausages and anything that doesn't resemble an original food, should be avoided. Any sort of fast food and junk foods, so most things that come in a package should probably be avoided. And then, there are other processes going on. So often, if we are sleep deprived, and we produce hormones by the name of leptin and ghrelin, which drive our appetite, and we tend to end up eating to replace the sleep. We tend to end up eating to replace, to make up for stress. So we need to be very aware of the lives that we're living, because these hormonal processes are all intertwined. They get cross-wired if we are out of balance. So we, also eat for entertainment or out of boredom. So again, that becomes a mindless form of eating, and in fact, it's killing us. So I'm going to ask you before I leave, are you ready for the 21-day challenge? It seems to have got very dark in here. Are you ready for the 21-day challenge? If so, I'd love to join you. I'm inshallah going to be starting mine next week. It takes about a week to prepare everything for the challenge, so make sure you've got rid of all the wrong kinds of foods, the crisps and the junk and all the things that are going to be very tempting. In my experience, the easiest way to do this is just to remove the things you don't want to eat from the home, and try and get your spouse or your family on board, especially while children are off school. It's a lot easier to do something like this because you don't have to worry about preparing sandwiches, which are going to obviously be out on this diet. Good luck, and let me know how you get on, and inshallah I wish you all the best in this life and the next life, and all the best with your health. Okay, ma'as salama.